Welcome to Accounting Life with Jotham Tai, a space where we'll talk about anything and everything surrounding the people that grind through your month-end accounting close.
Hi, everyone. Today's episode is the future of accounting and finance systems. Our guest today is Rob Bastress, Vice President of Business Technology at Pilot. On this episode, we talk about the past, present, and future of accounting and finance systems, and how the advent of AI and automation will change the nature of accounting work in exciting new ways. Now, I'll hand it over to our host, Gapify CEO, Jotham Tai.
Hey, Rob, how's it going? Thanks for joining us on today's podcast.
Hey, Jotham, good to be here.
Rob, these are my favorite types of podcast episodes because we get to geek out on technology. And Rob, known you for, I won't say how many years, so we don't age ourselves. But obviously there's a lot of new developments of technology, specifically as it relates to accounting systems. And I would love to get your perspectives and have a bunch of fun questions along the way for you. So thanks again for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me here. Yeah, things have changed quite a bit just in the time we've known each other, much less my career. So,
well, and that's a good place to start. My first question for you, just for just to warm up and get things going. When you first started your career, like what kind of like software and specifically as it relates to your relationships with finance teams, like what did the stack look like, for lack of a better word, back then? And feel free to answer. If it's going to age yourself, like, you don't have to be very specific, but I will age myself first. And I mentioned this to you before. When I first got into the industry, I was in audit and we had these things called a microfiche. So you get a lot of data in this little small piece of film, then you put in like some kind of big scope, and that's where you got all your data, which is like, it sounds like a technology from the 50s, but that wasn't that long ago. So I'm curious, what were you working with when you first started your career?
wow. That would have been back in, the mid 90s with Lucky Stores. And we actually had those tape silos where the tape spin around until it finds your file. That was high tech back then, let me tell you.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Silos and tapes. I don't know if like the word tape even registers in like the new generation's dictionaries anymore. Gosh, and that, I mean, speaking of tapes, like then it was interesting to see it like convert into like CD-ROMs, right? Having to install that software in every single machine.
I lived through the whole thing, man. It was, you wrote a query, you hit enter, and you walked away and got some coffee, and about an hour later, you had your response.
Oh, wow. That's like bringing it back. So, I mean, I guess the evolution, for lack of a better word, was like tapes, floppy disks, and then those diskettes, right? And then you had CDs. And then like all of a sudden, you started getting these digital keys, right? That you can just like use to download your software. And then came the cloud, which is, and well, now after that, ChatGPT and whatever, whatever AI technologies are being talked about. So we'll get to the future in a minute, but before we get too far ahead into Terminator and Skynet, in the current world, in today's world, Rob, like what kind of like system strategies are you seeing? I mean, I know when you and I first connected, and I think I don't know if this is still a conversation even, but the whole notion of being able to get everything out of your ERP, like a single source solution versus best of breed. It sounds like best of breed is winning out, but I guess I'll just stop there. I'd love to hear like what your perspectives are in today's market as it relates to technologies available to accounting teams.
Yeah, well, today you see everything really focused on revenue, from what I can tell, right? It's revenue operations is sort of the new buzzword. And it really kind of combines the technical side with the functional side. I see, it's this, especially with subscription-based companies, where things start off in your CRM system, they go through a CPQ process, and then they get put into flow directly into your ERP. And because those are so tightly woven together, things have really become this DevOps process to make sure that you can, one, react quickly at scale with high security, right? So I think those three things working together have gotten IT and the finance teams a lot closer together. Kind of what's already started and the way I see things moving is everything is very data driven. I think BI teams have become in focus, and it's kind of merged with FP&A. You're still doing that data analysis to not only get accurate recording of what's happened, but to try to get more and more accurate about what's going to happen, right? That forecasting.
Definitely. And I can relate to that actually. A weekend ago, Rob, one of our investors asked for data out of Salesforce, like very granular data on like really measuring pipeline velocity out of Salesforce, right? Like how long does it take for an opportunity to reach different stages? And as someone who now like leads a business and has to make decisions and do diagnostics, when I gather that data, I did it manually, by the way, and maybe a conversation for offline. I know you're a guru with Salesforce, but for some reason you can't get the data, like historical data for when pipelines converts. But anyway, long story short, when I got that data, we were able to run pivots, be able to see conversion rates from one stage to another by industry. It took me 6 hours to put that data together, but I spent another couple hours just like looking at the organized data because it's so cool, like being able to see performance and then be able to make decisions for for going forward. And yeah, I think you're spot on there. And you mentioned like FP&A and like BI solutions. So it's like what kind of like team structures are you seeing? And you also touched on like IT and finance, like and accounting. Like how do you see? And I don't know if there's a standard universal answer for this, Rob, but is there like a right structure for who owns different types of systems? Like should I think IT makes sense for IT usually to own like the ERP, but what about these BI solutions? Like, are you seeing any kind of trends around that in terms of ownership and teams?
There are definitely some trends that I'm seeing, but I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer to that question, right? I think it really depends on your product, how you're selling, who you're selling to, B2B, B2C. So I do see, things were generally under the IT umbrella. Then it got really focused more on business systems, which is, the marketing, CRM and ERP systems. And now I've seen it even get even more specific with, financial systems. My last gig was business technology, but really that was focused on billing and ERP and CPQ, that side of things, whereas that was split off from the CRM and the opportunities and the lead lifecycle and that sort of thing. So I do see things becoming more focused, but that is also, I think, very dependent on the type of company you're working for.
Yeah, that is true. So it just reminded me how just in the last like 10 years, oh wait, almost like I gave our ages away. But over just the course of the last several years, I'll put it that way, there's more, it seems like the tech stacks are growing, right? Like you have more solutions around like ecosystems like Salesforce or an ERP or an accounting system or CRM and billing. So it sounds like from a team structure, you're kind of having to divide and conquer now too. So there's a natural, segregation, or not segregation is not the right word, but like specialization that's happening. Is that different from what you had in mind?
That's a very good observation. I think, I had a diagram of when I was at Intact of, here's all the marketing, here's the core marketing system and all the boundary things that integrate to that. Here's the CRM system and all the boundary ecosystem for that. And then here's your ERP system with the same thing. You put all those three things together and you have probably 150 different applications that are feeding data into, and you're trying to prevent duplicates and data integrity. And it's gotten pretty crazy, but it's people always want, the new shiny object and the best and greatest add-on for data attribution or or something that's going to give them the leg up on the competition, right? So I think you have to be ready to be able to swap things in and out, and that's where guys like me like to help.
Well, and I think too, for guys like me, and I have a fun story to remind you and share after I ask you this question. But for accountants like me who do want the nicest new tools and toys for my finance team and accounting team, in some cases I love like digging in and kind of just like learning how to operate it myself. And of course, like you always need the support of like IT and tech leaders to make sure you know what you're doing. But are you also seeing that becoming more prominent where like, the accounting or finance teams themselves are, have a stronger desire to have ownership of the system that they use around them? Or has that been, more or less consistent over the years for you?
I think it depends on where the company is in their process, right? I think especially a lot of pre-IPO companies, the accounting teams will be very hands-on with a lot of that stuff. I think as you get closer to preparing for IPO, you need that change management in there. I think auditors are going to look for it. It's like who requested the change, who did the change, who verified the change before good. If anything that touches revenue, right? I think that's going to be expected. So I think it all depends on what we used to call organizational maturity, right? I think it's where are you on that spectrum is going to kind of determine how hands-on the accounting team is with, turning the dials. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? And I think there's even going forward going to be opportunities for the accounting team to continue to do that, without editing or modifying the original data, right? So you can do those what if analysis real time, you can be hands-on, but it doesn't actually change the underlying data until you're ready to go through and say, yes, I want to do this. And then you go through the normal change management process.
Right. So it sounds like there's a good balance between like maybe engaging accounting at a higher level, but then like, definitely partnering and collaborating with the IT team to make sure everything is being done in a compliant way, and obviously fits well with the overall like strategy and architecture of the organization. And on that note, I will now share this story that you may have forgotten from a long time ago, and maybe you remember this. Responses is no longer as a company in existence, so I'll try to also still be generic, so I'm not sharing too much details. But Rob, do you remember it was my first week at Responses when I worked there, and I wanted to get my hands on Avalara. I was like, oh, this looks simple to implement. Let me play around with the sandbox and get it configured so we can get our sales tax automation up and running. I asked for a refresh of Intact, but you and your team were working on a bunch of other projects and it wiped out your sandbox. And I was so embarrassed. I was red. Rob, I don't know if you remember that, but I actually bought you a 6-pack of beer as like a peace offering. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that.
Well, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I do know what you're talking about, because I know Intact, you used to be able to just refresh your sandbox copy with a click of a button. And we had our Salesforce sandbox and our Intact sandbox connected together. And when you did that, it broke the connection unless you did some follow-up steps. And so that sounds familiar. Yeah. You weren't the only one to make that mistake.
Oh, I mean, I had great intentions in mind, Rob. I wanted that like automation right away because we were doing, actually in that case, we weren't doing sales tax calculations properly. And I won't overshare, but it was definitely an issue for the accounting team. But there's a right way to have done it, which is partnering with our IT and finance system partners, and it cost me a 6-pack and a lot of embarrassment. But thanks for forgiving me and still joining today's podcast.
It's okay. So that's always been the key, is you need to be able to react quickly in a lot of these things. So when you need that information, it needs to be refreshed, and so you can dive into that. I'd rather you dive into the sandbox and do that rather than diving into production and doing and
Yeah, if I did that with in production. I would have lost my CPA license and all my audit street cred, whatever I have left. Well, Rob, in the last few minutes, I always love just kind of geeking out on the future too. So, yeah, obviously, in today's environment, we already talked about there's more and more solutions cropping up in every part of like the ecosystem. There's a lot of talk with, LLMs and AI and Chat GPT specifically, and some accountants are starting to get excited about how they can adopt Chat GPT. Although I'm more on the skeptical side, at least timing wise. Yeah, I mean, let's just say 10 years from now, like, what do you think we'll look back on and see the biggest? What would be the biggest change 10 years from now that you see in finance systems if you had to, just for fun guess?
Yeah, the Chat GPT has definitely been in the headlines lately, and I have read some articles on how that could apply to accounting systems and where that's going. And I really think, and I'll preface this with a lot of the accountants that I've met in the past. It's like they kind of are resistant to automation naturally, as long as you. But my thing is, I think it'll be easier for the day-to-day bookkeeping side of things. All you have to do is let the automation run and reconcile, right? You're spending most of your time just reconciling final numbers. Is that account code? What's the sum for that? What's the sum for that? If all the sums line up, then you don't need to go into the detail like you used to have to do, or probably some companies are still doing. So if you'll learn to trust the data at some point. And then those accountants that are spending the bulk of their time analyzing what's already happened, a lot of them, I think, will shift their focus onto what's going to happen, right? That FP&A side that is, okay, well, I already know how all these wheels turn and how that number comes out to this. They're going to be the ones that have that background to know to really how, hey, if that changes over here, that's going to make this graph go the other direction, and we're going to be able to increase revenue by, I don't know, 20%. They'll have that idea, right? So you'll see a lot of those people that were more focused on history to be focused on forecasting, I think.
And that is like foundationally like such a great point. I'm like smiling because in the few dozen podcast episodes that we've done now, I don't think anyone has put it that clearly. And I think this is something the accounting profession and our audience can be excited about. So historically, to your point, a lot of what I used to do was check that everything we already did was correct and compliant. But if all of that is being handled by automation, my focus is going to be, well, how do we make sure we calibrate and not just from a forecasting perspective, but how can we reduce risk going forward, right? Everything is always like, let's look back and see what we did wrong. But hopefully this world that we're in now will allow people like me to focus on the future. And with our solution being accruals management, Rob, we take care of a lot of like the calculations now. And actually, I'm preparing a webinar for a partner in a couple of weeks around this. If you're able to get the blocking and tackling and the heavy lifting done by Gapify's automation, GL accounting managers should like think about like what type of accrual approaches to apply to different vendor classes. And we never had the time to do that because we were just so busy. Friends like Cyrus and the old names that we used to have, we would just like crunch away at the numbers that we had to crunch through, and we never really had the chance to be strategic about how to reduce risk in the future. So that's one heck of a point, and I sure hope, like for the sake of the profession, that happens quickly, because I know the newer generation of accountants, Rob, and a lot of the customers that we talk to who are just entering the profession new for the first time, they have no patience whatsoever for the Excel spreadsheet work that I used to do back in the day. So yeah, really great point there. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I don't know of any accountants that are ready to let go of Excel just yet. But that's kind of where I see things going is they're going to be more focused on, instead of taking 10 days for that month end close, it's going to get to like almost real time. It's going to get shorter and shorter and shorter until it's just a click of a button, books are closed for the month. But what's going to become more important, and where I see a lot of public companies getting hammered for is they missed expectations. Well, they wouldn't have mixed expectations if their forecasting would have been more accurate, right? So I think, that's where the focus will be.
Yep. I mean that, and yeah, I think the analysts and the world that evaluates businesses now like wants to be able to see further and further ahead. And if we internally can't even provide that data, then how can we expect the market to get it right for us? So yeah, all fantastic points, Rob. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think we should geek out again in the future. If you're up for it, maybe even like I want to get myself more up to speed with Chat GPT. I've been playing around with it, but just more from the standpoint of like asking fun questions. But I hear it can like help you do like Excel formulas and so on. So maybe we can, do another episode on that if you're up for it next time.
Yeah, that would be wild. It's a lot of garbage in, garbage out. So you got to know what data sets you're working with. Whether that paper that it's going to write is going to be made of factual data or fictional data. That's the important thing about AI. I see is where that data is coming from. I think you're going to need Congress to get involved with making sure that gets straightened out. But that's another story.
Oh, yeah, it's another story. Maybe another episode beyond that. Well, Rob, thanks again for joining today's episode, and yeah, look forward to doing this again in the future.
All right, Joe, it's been great catching up.